Hey everybody, we're going to be focusing on the basics of shading or black and white shading today, and that primary, lesson we're going to learn is crosshatching. So crosshatching kind of looks like this. Here's an example, just kind of if you look up what crosshatching is on the internet, you kind of end up with this, where you have something that appears if you cross your eyes or squint your eyes, and you can see that from this side, the left side, gradually gets darker as it goes to the right. And this is kind of a trick of the eye that while it's not, completely shaded in, it's not, a gray color, it, as a whole, when used properly, comes together quite well. So you can kind of just use cross-hatching like this, like a basket weave, the way that I think of it, or straight lines, and you can kind of just experiment around with kind of, in a way, scratching on the paper. Feel free to, just practice with this with me and kind of make a little pattern or scratch design, cross-hatching design on your paper. So once you kind of have an idea of what cross-hatching can look like, one of the examples that I've put here already is one of the spheres. Now, when you finally, learn cross-hatching, very basics, how do I put that on a round object, or how do I put that on a character? So an example here, you have the sun, which I prefer to draw always on the side of my drawings, just so that I have an idea of where the sunlight is coming from. And everything else that's kind of not being covered by it is then, shadowed in darkness. So we already have, cross-hatching, but this is already kind of more messily cross-hatched. You have a roundness to the shape. While it's not, completely smooth, like this line that kind of goes across the sphere, it implies that, there's some sort of smoothness that once, a certain part of the sphere doesn't hit the sun or the light or lamp, that then it slowly starts to fade into a darker color. If you want to get really complicated, then, I would definitely experiment with using these different types of shading and vary, so have certain parts be lighter than others, but this is, for the most part, a fairly same color, grayish color sphere for the drawing, but still you can kind of tell there's a roundness. It's a little bit darker, in this area here, behind the sphere, since most of that sunlight is being blocked out, and you can get a little bit of an idea of, where the light comes from. This, is a mini technique where when you learn in the future a lot more about lighting and all of, that more complicated area, you'll learn that there's actually, surprisingly, as you hit the corner of the ball here, light actually deflects itself, so it manages to hit the back right around here. I can't off the top of my head remember exactly why it does so, but it's just a technique that I kind of picked up from taking other classes. So just know that usually on the edges of spheres there's a little bit of light coming from the back, as if there's a wall behind it, that wall, the wall light deflects onto the back of the sphere and certain other parts. Definitely experiment around with that sort of stuff and see kind of what looks or appears natural and what doesn't, and you'll kind of get a little bit of an idea. So I have two more examples. We have a cone here and we have a box here, so we'll do the cone first. A cone is also round, except the shape's just a little bit different. So if you kind of look at the bottom, that's what the bottom would look like. Not super neat, but kind of, sphere, and it slowly goes into a curve at the top, or kind of like a point at the top. So it's kind of close to a sphere. So you'd imagine, kind of half here. This is where the shadow kind of hits more towards the half curve in here, if you're looking at the light from this way. So with that in mind, we don't have to have that reference there, just so it's not super distracting. Kind of just experiment around, you have the cross-hatching, so you go one way, and then you go the other, and then you go back to that one way, and then you go to the other again. And you can kind of darken it as it gets to the corner here. And then if you want to have a little overcast from the cone, and kind of imagine something along the lines of this. So it's not the most, I guess, most detailed, or no, it can be used for detail, but it looks a little bit messy at first. But when you get a little bit more practice with it, and I guess this is more of a, I guess the cross hatching is considered more of a sketchy type of shading. Once you get accustomed to that, it can actually look very, very good. I have, I guess, a really quick practice that I did just for the purposes of this video, where I did an eyeball, which I'll go over with you how I did that at the bottom after we do the square. But this is kind of what you can use it for. You don't have to just use it for shapes, because that would kind of get tiring after a certain amount of time. But you can use it for, you know, people's faces. You can use it for trees and scenery. You can use it for animals and all sorts of things. So that's that sort of thing done. I guess we can also briefly go over fur, since fur is a little bit difficult, but not, I guess, once you get the hang of it, it can be a little bit easier. So you also have, you know, this cube here. I like to say that this would be the darkest point of the cube or rectangle, or however you see it, just because it is completely shadowed and not being touched by the light. And you can, of course, here, you know, the top part is being a little bit somewhat touched by, you know, the lamplight or whatever light we want to imagine for this. So it kind of fades back, and then you have the corner here where it's kind of, I guess, grabbing to the corners but seeping back as you get towards the center around here for the cube. And then, of course, you could do the same thing, have, you know, a cube shadow behind it, just kind of messily putting it back there. Could be positioned a little bit better, but that's kind of the idea of it. So going straight to the eyeball, it's not going to look exactly like what I just did, because not every drawing is going to look exactly the same, but feel free to, you know, pause for a second and just kind of draw, I guess, what I would consider just 2 lines. Feel free to make it as messy as you want, you know, with curve number 1 and partial curve number 2. And once we're done with that, we'll get into it. So kind of shrinking my pencil brush down a little bit. One of the main things I guess I'll start with is the eyeball, just so that we can get that out of the way. So it's kind of a mostly circle thing. It's not going to take up the whole eye, and kind of have the pupil here. And we're going to not touch that for a second. So after that, you can kind of imagine, you know, most people will have fairly, you know, prominent eyelids, or in a just drawing case, we'll just have the character have very, you know, large eyelids. So what was shown here is that, you know, there's a little bit of an eyelid line. So you can kind of use that crosshatch shading to your advantage to map out where that line's going to be. So here's like a dark line, and then it kind of extends out because the shadow is not going to be concentrated in one spot, because then it becomes more of a block shading thing and less of a, I guess, cross shading technique. You can kind of imagine, okay, well, here's sort of the eyelid. Can kind of close the eye up here and expand out just a little bit. Not every, I guess, cross hatching has to be, you know, the 2 different directions. It's all up to, I guess, preference as well. So you can kind of just, okay, well, here's, you know, you have the line underneath the eye. For some people might have creases underneath their eyes if they're a little bit older. You have the eyeball, since the eyeball is not going to be completely, you know, clear. You have this sort of eye going on here. Now it's mostly, you know, very sketchy, because I'm just doing this very quickly for the sake of the video, but you can, of course, you know, feel free to take a little bit more time with yours and kind of refine it to look a little bit more, I guess, clean, is the best way to put it. And then you can use a eyebrow afterwards, and I kind of just scribble it on for the sake of time, but you can, of course, make it a little bit more sparse, and kind of what I did over there. A lot of practice, and a lot of, you know, if you feel free to erase. I would definitely recommend, if you feel like you did a little bit too much, which is why I wouldn't necessarily start out super dark in the beginning, then you can, of course, erase it afterwards and kind of just redo it again. So a lot of it's just kind of getting an idea and just practicing, and definitely kind of experimenting around, since I'm just kind of adding shades here and there, and it actually kind of looks, you know, fairly decent. Another way that you can practice with, eyes, for example, is, looking at pictures online, or taking a picture of a family member or a friend, or any passerby, if they want you to take a picture of them, if you have to ask them first. But kind of, just looking at real life models really also helps with getting an idea of where darker shadows and lighter shadows exist, and especially with cross-hatching being such an easy thing, or an easy thing to pick up and kind of get a hang of afterwards, unlike doing color, or a lot more complex skin tone shading and all of that. That you'll learn later on if you continue to take classes, but getting an idea of what it looks like in the real world doesn't necessarily have to be the most realistic drawing that you're doing, but it definitely helps give you that base idea of, okay, well, this is how it should look, and this is where I can deviate from where it still looks, I guess, natural, or normal is the best way to put it. So that was the, I guess, semi-short tutorial for basics of shading. I hope you enjoyed, and I cannot wait to see you in the next following videos. Thanks!